Hello, I'm Mr. Beasley. This video has mostly been designed to help students prepare for the AQA Literature Paper 1 as it is in 2019, although it will be useful for anyone studying the play Macbeth at any point as long as you're mindful of the expectations from your particular exam board. When you open up your exam paper, you'll need to find the question set on Macbeth, and then you'll see a brief introduction to the task which has been set, which will look a bit like this. So you're told where the extract has been taken from, in this case Act 2, Scene 4, and you get a bit of the context. At this point in the play, Duncan has been murdered and Macbeth has been named as the next King of Scotland. The extract is then printed for you underneath, and this is the only bit of the play that you'll have in front of you, so you need to get as much out of this as you can. Underneath this printed extract, you'll be given the focus for the task you need to complete. And it is vital that you take note of this. The task is not asking you to write everything you know about this scene or the play in general. The focus is on unnatural events, unnatural acts, and so everything that you write needs to link back to this focus in some way. So let's go back to the extract. It's an exchange between the Thane of Ross and an old man. The scene takes place right at the end of Act 2, immediately after the murder of King Duncan and the discovery of his body. The king's two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, have fled, fearing for their own lives, and so Macbeth has been named as the next King of Scotland. Shakespeare uses this scene partly as a commentary on the time that's passed between those two pivotal bits of action and Act 3, where the audience will see the newly crowned Macbeth, and partly to show how the natural order has been disturbed by the treachery and murder of the previous scenes. But before we have a look at this in more detail, I mentioned just now that the focus for this question is unnatural acts, and so we'll need to make sure that we link back to this theme as the analysis develops. But what else are you expected to do when approaching this part of the exam paper? What is it that the AQA marking criteria expects you to do? If we have a look at this part of the marking criteria, which is where you'd be awarded somewhere between 21 and 25 marks, you'll see that they want you to respond to the question in a way which is thoughtful and developed. They want you to integrate quotations into the sentences that you're writing, and more about that in just a minute. They want you to use a well-selected range of subject-specific terminology and analyse the language Shakespeare uses. And they also want you to make links to other relevant parts of the play and show a clear understanding of contextual factors. So quite a lot to fit into a 50-minute answer. Let's think about how we can meet the first of these requirements. How do you make sure that your answer is well structured? Well, the simplest way is just to make sure that you're approaching the extract logically, in other words, from top to bottom, beginning to end. So let's do that now and see how we can meet the other assessment objectives as we go along. The old man begins by reflecting on the 70 years that he can remember. A score is 20. And he says that within that time he has seen many strange and dreadful things. The knight is personified through the adjective sore as being sick and unwell due to the unnatural events that have taken place. But, he says, the night which has just taken place has trifled former knowings, which basically means that they are trivial and insignificant compared to the night that's just gone. Ross then replies by picking up on what the old man has said about the night by pointing to the heavens or sky and saying that they are troubled with man's act. So he too is using personification to show how the natural world has been upset by the actions of men. Shakespeare includes one of his favourite metaphors in this bit, which is of the world as a stage. But here, because of the violence which has taken place, the stage is described as bloody. He then goes on to describe how, according to the clock, it is day, and yet it is dark. And I'm going to show you how to include a bit like this into an answer which meets many of the assessment objectives. Firstly, let's look at this response. Ross says it is dark when it should be light. I know this when it says, by the clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. This means it's dark when it's daytime. The word strangles means to choke. Now, on the surface, there are a few things which this response does which are fine, and there's nothing in this which is wrong. However, the focus here is on what Ross says, rather than on why Shakespeare has Ross say these lines. There is a line which is quoted accurately here, but it's sort of bolted on. I know this when it says, which is just introduced in a sort of clumsy way. The explanation which follows is also very limited. The first part just repeats something which has already been said, and while it's good to pick up on a powerful word like strangles here, the word isn't identified as a verb and it's defined rather than having the effect of it explained. There's no technical vocabulary here at all, no reference back to the theme of unnatural acts which was set up in the question, and no attempt to link to themes or genre. So let's see if we can do a bit better. One of the unnatural acts which is described by Ross in this scene is that daylight has been replaced by night. Shakespeare uses the metaphor of the world as a bloody stage in which darkness is personified as a threatening and menacing force which strangles the travelling lamp and violently chokes the light out of the day. If light is symbolic of life, then darkness is symbolic of death, which links to another of the play's unnatural acts, the Murder of Duncan, which also takes place at night time. So this response is immediately more effective. Firstly, it clearly answers the question by referring to the theme of unnatural acts, which is set up in the question. It shows awareness of Shakespeare as the playwright. It identifies a number of techniques which Shakespeare uses: metaphor, personification, symbolism. The quotations are neatly embedded into the sentences, so the whole thing flows nicely. The quotation is then analysed in terms of the image that Shakespeare wanted to create. And there's a link between this part of the play and another unnatural act, which is the murder of King Duncan. Now, this paragraph is slightly artificial because I'm trying to illustrate how to hit the assessment objectives. You don't need to make a link to another part of the play with every point that you make, but these are the skills the exam board wants to see, and so they should regularly appear in your answer. So let's continue with the rest of the extract. After Ross has spoken about the strange change in daylight, the old man replies by making an explicit connection between this unnatural event and the deed that's done, which is a sort of euphemistic way of referring to the murder of Duncan. In fact, it might remind you of Macbeth's words to his wife after returning from Duncan's bedchamber in Act 2, Scene 2. "I have done the deed." Those alliterative Ds have a real dull finality about them. It's worth making sure here that you understand why it is that the murder of Duncan is considered an unnatural act in the first place. Well, firstly, and most obviously, Duncan was murdered, so he didn't die of natural causes. His life was cut short by the action of Macbeth plunging a dagger into him. Then there's the Elizabethan view of how the world is organised, which is a structure known as the chain of being. Now, you can think about the chain of being as a sort of inverted pyramid where the width of the different levels indicates your importance and the amount of power that you have. God is at the top, followed by kings who operate on a level somewhere between divinity and mortal men. Then there are the different ranks of men, followed by animals, plants, and non-living things like rocks at the bottom. The point of this was to let everyone in society know where their place in the chain was and to accept it. Challenging your place in society would lead to chaos. King James, who was on the throne at the time Macbeth was written, believed in what is known as the divine right of kings, which basically means that he ruled with God's authority, and it was only through God's power that he could be removed. Shakespeare incorporated this message into this play by showing how unnatural it was for Macbeth to challenge his place in society by killing the monarch and taking his place. What we see in this scene is evidence of the chaos which occurs as a result of this murderous act. There are a couple of other unnatural events described in this scene, both connected to animals. Firstly, the old man describes something that he saw last Tuesday, where a falcon towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. Now, students of mine know that I love a good illustration, and I think I've excelled myself here. The old man mentions 3 animals in this image: a falcon, an owl, and a mouse. And this picture shows how the natural order of things should be. The mouse is on the ground, the owl is flying close to the ground in search of mice, its natural prey, while the falcon is towering high in the sky. What is unnatural here is that the falcon was killed by the owl. The owl, like Macbeth, has overreached itself and killed the thing it should be literally beneath in the social order. The final image in this extract is introduced by Ross and is one of the most bizarre and disturbing in the play. Duncan's horses, who are described as beauteous and swift, turned wild in nature. They went crazy, broke out of their stalls, refused to obey commands, as if they wanted to make war with mankind. Think about the chain of being again, where animals sit in relation to men. Here we have horses who have behaved so far as the best examples of their race, battling mankind and resisting their commands. Most unnatural. The image is developed further by the old man who has heard about the behaviour of the horses and adds that he has heard they eat each other, which is then confirmed by Ross in the next line. So, lots of unnatural behaviour, unnatural acts to get your teeth into in this scene, with the overall objective of Shakespeare being to show how the natural order of things has been disturbed by Macbeth's murder of Duncan and the onset of chaos as a result. So, to finish, what other parts of the play could you discuss with this question in mind? Well, I've already talked about the most obvious, which is the murder of Duncan, an act which disturbs the Elizabethan social order known as the chain of being. You could also consider the riddling words of the witches at the beginning of the play, where fair is foul and foul is fair. Or the second time the witches in Act 1, Scene 3 appear and are described as having very unnatural look about them, masculine with their beards, but feminine in all other regards. And then there's Lady Macbeth's invocation to the night in Act 1, Scene 5, where she asks the evil powers in the world to strip away her femininity in order to make her capable of involving herself in the murder of a king who looks, remember, like her own father.